Good day, everyone. It's an absolute privilege to be here today to speak to you about the climate crisis and the urgency to address this crisis as it relates to flood risk. I grew up in the city of Lagos, Nigeria, which is Africa's most populous city, and as some of you may know, it is widely described, Lagos is widely described as a fast-paced, vibrant, and a chaotic city. However, this picture doesn't tell you the full story of how Lagos looks like, because this is also Lagos, a beautiful coastal city, and this is also Lagos, a beautiful city with an interesting nightlife. Unlike many European countries of the world that has 4 distinct seasons, Lagos and Nigeria at large has a tropical wet and dry seasons, meaning we have roughly 6 months of persistent rainfall and another 6 months of dryness or low rainfall. Now, it didn't matter where I lived in Lagos, Nigeria. When it rained and it flooded, just like everyone, including school children, I would sometimes roll the sleeves of my trousers to navigate the flood, so sometimes knee-deep, and on my lucky days, I would have to hang on to a truck to navigate the flooded areas. Now, at the time, due to my background in urban planning, I didn't think of this recurring flood as a thing of climate change. I attributed it to the impact of the rapid urbanizing city of Lagos. But as time went on, I realized that there was a shift in the onset of our seasons, which affected the duration and the intensity of flooding. And so I became more curious, I was anxious. And the anxiety basically was because the rainy seasons that brought us joy, and times where we look forward to plant our crops and to escape the scorching sun of the dry seasons, became seasons of heightened fear and dread. People basically feared for their lives, for loss of their lives, properties, and livelihoods. So I harnessed my climate anxiety to pursue a master's degree in climate change science and policy, because I needed to understand the science that belied the increasing flood risk. And true to my motivation, I grasped the science that underlied this flood risk. And science tells us that as the climate continues to warm, the atmosphere's capacity to hold more water vapor increases, which means that you have more drier days and more intense wet days. And so to quantify this, as the climate continues to warm, we would see extreme precipitation could increase by 7% on the average per degree of warming. Global surface temperature has increased by 1.2 degrees since pre-industrial era. And according to the IPCC, we are locked at 1.5 degrees before 2050, even though we cut our emissions by half. And so there's an urgency to act quickly. But sadly, we are still drawn back by debates that says that humans are not drivers of this change, that we are basically victims of a continuously changing natural cycle. But this is not true. According to Sir Isaac Newton, quoting the law of inertia now, it says that a body will continue at a state of rest, except acted upon by an external force. And this change, the change of the body, will be directly proportional to the impact of the force applied upon it. So what we know is that the sun emits radiation to the Earth in form of heat. The Earth absorbs some of this heat and reflects some back into the atmosphere. And as man continues his pursuit of comfort in a world of finite resources through fossil fuel burning and more emissions of greenhouse gases, it begins to warm our climate increasingly. And this is basically what we refer to as the climate crisis. And so this graph you see on your screen shows you how the Earth has controlled the climate by itself naturally for over 800,000 years. This is just a snapshot in time. But we could see that from the point closer to 0, which is 10,000 years, where we came into the stable planetary condition, where we could actually predict our seasons, man's input in the climate has caused the spike that we have experienced today. So basically, man is the driver of climate change as we have it in science. Now, the urgency to adapt and to mitigate the impact of climate change dawned on me when I modeled the impact of climate change on fluvial flood risk in Lagos, Nigeria. And by pluvial flooding, I mean flooding caused by extreme precipitation. Now, from the study findings, I realized that business as usual climate path for humanity is not an option. Now, this is because, for the present day 100-year rainfall, which is the one in 100-year rainfall magnitude, if we continue on the trajectory of the business as usual, it could become a 1 in a 20-year rainfall magnitude, meaning that we would see more frequent extremes from future climate scenarios. And what this research also revealed is that flooding is and would be more significant in areas that are predominantly occupied by the urban poor. And so I decided to combine the trajectory of the climate change with the projected population growth, and I found out that for this particular climate trajectory, we would see an exposed population to flooding increase by 124%. Now, this is actually alarming. And more concerning is the fact that the climate crisis would widen the socioeconomic gap that already exists in our society. Take, for example, the recent flood risks that happened in Pakistan. This is 6 months after the flood risks that happened in Pakistan. And according to the World Health Organization, we have about 10 million persons who still do not have access to safe drinking water, forcing them to drink potentially disease-ridden water. Of the estimated 33 million flood victims affected at the time, as of today, about 21 million persons, including 9 million school children, still require humanitarian assistance. Now, amongst the areas that were hit by this flooding, the most vulnerable places in Pakistan were most affected, where children who already suffered from malnutrition, low school enrollment, poor sanitation, and poor access to drinking waters existed. So essentially, what the climate crisis does is widen its already wide socioeconomic gaps. Now, following the ratification of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, which aimed to eradicate poverty, end global hunger, and to protect the planet by 2030, an inquiry of this, after 8 years of policy adoption, would be, as the fossil fuel-dominated economy which we have lived in, and the consumerist society which we basically participate in, has it driven us closer to these 17 targets? When you consider the fact that the Sustainable Development Goals propagates the need for a decent work and economic growth, but we are still largely living in a climate or in a world that is strongly rooted in fossil fuels, isn't it contradictory to continue to pursue Sustainable SDG 8 with fossil fuels? Wouldn't this continue to also increase the socioeconomic gap that we already see existing? So in essence, what climate change does is to expose the social injustice that we already have in our world, and to also show us the, sorry about that. Okay, so in essence, I think I'll just skip that. Climate change has been broadly talked about as a doomsday story, where there is a cliff, and once you get to the cliff, it is irreversible. But for me, I do not see climate change as a cliff. I see climate change as the redemption of humanity. And what my charge would be to you today is not to propagate the story of climate change as a doomsday, but actually as an opportunity to change the way at which we see things. For example, if we begin to look at climate change as a way to solve insurgency and radicalization of youth in fossil fuel or oil-rich countries, we could see that shifting from fossil fuel and energy to renewable energy could solve insurgencies in those countries. I mean, why would a country like Nigeria, who is rich in oil, so rich in oil, still have insurgents who are youth, who do not go to schools, fight around with arms? So transiting from fossil fuel to renewable energy could help us solve the climate crisis. Finally, my urge for you today is that become innovative, become inventive, and if you can't be any of this, support inventions. We should begin to see solutions, or begin to support solutions that would help us reduce atmospheric CO2 and store them in carbon sinks. We should also begin to see solutions that takes us away from this fossil fuel economy into renewable energy. Over time, history has shown that man is a good problem solver. We've connected the ends of the world by building ships, roads, and different technological advancements. Medicine has showed us that we could cure all sorts of diseases, including polio, coronavirus, and a vaccine as small as the penicillin. And so I believe that if we have the right kind of mindset and we pursue what we have thought upon, we'll be able to solve the climate crisis. Thank you.